This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says an Israeli delegation will travel to Sudan in coming days to finalize a deal on normalization of ties. Egyptians are voting to elect members of parliament, but concerns over the spread of the coronavirus abound. And authorities in Cape Town have lifted water usage restrictions imposed when the worst drought in over 100 years left the city almost completely dry. It's a pleasure to have you with us today. Welcome to Africa Live on CGTN with me, Beatrice Marshall, in Nairobi. Also coming up on the program. In business news, Ugandan economists are asking the government to compel commercial banks to lower lending rates to single digits. And in your sports, COVID-19 cases spike as 200 football players and staff test positive in Tunisia. And let's begin the hour with the warming relationship between Sudan and Israel. According to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, an Israeli delegation is expected in Khartoum soon. This comes after the two nations agreed to take steps to normalize ties. The agreement, which was brokered with the help of the United States and announced on Friday, made Sudan the third Arab government to end hostilities with Israel in the last 2 months. However, it is still not clear how long it will take for the two nations to establish full diplomatic ties. Egyptians have begun voting to elect members of parliament. More than 5,000 candidates are running for 568 seats. It is the second election that the nation has conducted during this COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Adel Mahroui has more details.
Egypt has nearly 63 million eligible voters this year. Half of them should be heading to the polling station in the first phase of the parliamentary election, which is taking place in 14 governorships this weekend.
This is a duty of everybody who is eligible for election. That's why I came today on the first day to give my voice. The government has a project, and this project, I think it extends to 2030. Now the vehicle which is going to adopt this project and execute it will be the parliament. So it is very important that the elements of the parliament would be really keen, national, and giving.
Since 2011, securing the vote has been the country's major concern. The Egyptian armed forces and the police have intensified security around voting stations during every election. But this year, however, the country is more concerned about the danger of COVID-19 infections spreading during the vote.
There's a huge difference between the election process before and after the coronavirus. The polling stations get disinfected every 2 hours. Disinfection gear is provided to us in abundance. We cancel the phosphoric finger ink to mark voters for hygiene reasons. We have additional face masks too. If a voter does not have one, that won't prevent him from casting his ballot.
More than 1,400 ambulances have been stationed across the country to deal with any health emergencies that might arise. Fears of the pandemic and an apparent loss of voters' interest greatly affected the Senate elections in September. Only about 14% of voters turned out for the exercise. After a rather low voters' participation during last month's Senate election, turnout is going to be the main focus and the biggest challenge for this year's Egyptian parliament election. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Cairo.
And let's shift our focus to South Africa now. Authorities in Cape Town have lifted water usage restrictions they imposed when the worst drought in over 100 years almost left the city completely dry. The move comes after better than expected rains filled up dams and an annual assessment gave a positive outlook. CGTN's Travers Andrews has the details.
The decision marks a huge turn of events for a city that grappled with a drought for many years. No more water restrictions, the city now says, after dams filled up 100% recently. The city authorities have decided to lift the restrictions after taking a number of considerations into account. It also means Cape Townians now don't have to ration water as badly as many have been forced to.
What is important and probably quite significant about this decision and announcement is that it would be the first time since 2015 that restrictions have been lifted within the Western Cape water supply system. And it's the first time in 6 years that dam levels are at the 100% mark. And so I think that does show the progress that has been made.
It's not just good seasonal rains that the city has benefited from, but lower consumption levels put less strain on the water resources. Now public and private swimming pools are able to top up, albeit with the city's new water-wise tariff, which is lower than any tariff imposed over the years.
He's right in lifting the restrictions. It's a little bit difficult and almost bizarre to keep restrictions in place when you've got dams that are 100% full. I also think the city of Cape Town needed some good news as well. So that's another useful way of bringing something of a celebration that nature has been kind to us.
This change in fortunes has taught many lessons about the resilience the city and its residents have shown. It could provide an example to many other African cities facing this ever-increasing phenomenon, usually associated with climate change.
Well, certainly I think across Africa, the model is suggesting that these kinds of droughts and or flooding are occurring in regions rather than just a whole Southern Africa or a whole African continent. So we have to look more carefully and have to do, I think, a lot more monitoring of rainfall and evaporation and also of managing our catchments at the same time.
For now, though, summer is fast approaching, and that means water consumption may go up, especially with the greater utilization of swimming pools and water sprinkler systems. The city says that even though projections show that dam levels are likely not to drop below 50% by next year's rainfall, they still want residents to maintain a water-wise approach, that very same approach that helps stave off the dreaded day zero scenario. That's Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
The United Nations officially turned 75 years old this weekend. But this milestone comes as COVID-19 rages around the world, upending lives and deepening crisis. As the world body marks its anniversary, we look at how the UN is holding up in today's realities and how the pandemic is shaping its response to key challenges of global health, poverty and conflict. Li-Ling Tan reports.
On the approval of the Charter of the United Nations.
Back in 1945, following two devastating world wars, representatives of 50 countries came together with a promise. No more world wars, uphold international law, protect human rights, improve lives. 75 years later, we've been spared another world war, but a microscopic scourge is now ravaging nations, claiming lives and devastating economies.
On United Nations Day, I reinforce my appeal for a global ceasefire so we can devote all our energies to fighting COVID-19. And let us act together now to defeat the pandemic, to prevent climate catastrophe, uphold the equality of women and men, and pave the way for a safer, healthier, more just and sustainable world.
It's a lot to handle, but the UN is the only world body with the reach, the resources and the scope provided for by the UN Charter. That charter defines the core principles of the UN and paved the way for a multilateral approach to international emergencies, conflict resolution, peacekeeping, development, and humanitarian aid.
You know, I think the concepts, the ideals that are found in this little blue book lays the basis for the multilateral system that we have today. Obviously, in 1945, you know, the UN was created more of as a talk shop, as an organization that was norm setting. But, you know, peacekeeping is not mentioned anywhere in the UN Charter. It was invented.
Also invented under the UN umbrella, the World Health Organization, now leading the global COVID-19 response.
This is not a drill.
The United Nations Children's Fund UNICEF stockpiling syringes for distribution when COVID vaccines become available. The World Food Programme combating hunger where pandemic restrictions have disrupted food supply chains. And the UN agencies that help refugees and protect human rights further threatened by the global health crisis.
The number of specialized UN agencies has multiplied over the past 7.5 decades, well positioning the UN to deploy into the field in times of crisis. But the number of member nations has also greatly increased, from 50 countries in 1945 to 193 nations today, and that has often made consensus difficult to reach.
Disagreements within the UN's most powerful arm, the Security Council, have come with a high cost. Bickering among key member nations has stymied efforts to resolve protracted conflicts, end civil wars, prevent genocide and human rights abuse, and defeat the pandemic. As the UN turns 75, the coronavirus is testing the multilateral system like never before. And UN watchers say how united these nations are in taking on today's pandemic could shape how we tackle bigger issues like climate change tomorrow. Li Lingtan, CGTN, New York.
China will begin assessing proposals tomorrow for its new next 5-year plan. The critical blueprint outlines the country's goals for its economy and development. The 14th plan is one of the key issues to be discussed during a 4-day gathering in Beijing of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China. Future targets and the long-term vision for 2035 will also be a focus. And now let's take a look at what the term 5-year plan is all about.
The 5-year plan sets targets and maps out the country's future. It designs key construction projects and production lines and formulates how each sector can contribute efficiently to the national economy. But it's not just an economic plan. It also focuses on other sectors such as the environment, social welfare, and the military. It guides all levels of government and major players, including banks and big companies, to tune into the country's frequency. But how does the government compile such a comprehensive plan? China's National Development and Reform Commission first conducts a midterm evaluation of the current plan. With this as a base, the Politburo Standing Committee then consults thousands of experts and insiders before drafting the final plan. It will be examined, debated, and redrafted many times before it's finally put in front of the NPC for approval. 2020 is the last year of the 13th 5-year plan. Now, China is drafting its 14th document.
The African Union Commission Deputy Chairperson Kwesi Kwate has thanked the Chinese government for joining hands with African countries in the fight against the coronavirus pandemic. He also praised China for setting an example for Africa and the world. CGTN's Daniel Arapmoy has that story.
Once again, China has donated medical supplies to African nations as they battle a resurgent coronavirus. It is a path that China has chosen to walk with Africa in these troubled times.
I'd like to thank the government of China for this continued show of solidarity. China has always stood by Africa in thick and thin, and we have learned from China many ways. And it is said that your best friends are those who stand by you in times when you are in difficulty. China has continued to prove that. So on behalf of His Excellency the Chairperson, I'd like once again to thank the government and people of China.
These medical supplies, which consist of medical equipment and also consumables, they are very helpful, especially during this our pandemic of COVID-19.
Once again, China is committing to stand with Africa as the social and economic bonds grow stronger.
China and Africa have stood together since the pandemic outbreak. We are pleased to see that under the leadership of the African Union and governments, African countries have got a good achievement more than expected. This is due to the efforts of the people of Africa and also due to international solidarity and cooperation.
China has so far donated more than 400 tons of medical supplies to African countries. This is in addition to deploying medical experts to various African nations. Up to now, 46 hospitals in 42 countries have benefited from this cooperation with China. Daniel Arapmoy, CGTN.
Recently, Chinese President Xi Jinping delivered a speech at a meeting to commemorate the 70th anniversary of the Chinese People's Volunteers Mission. The team assisted Korea in resisting U.S. aggression. South African international relations experts have been reacting to the speech.
In terms of lessons or takeaways, we can appreciate international solidarity. When there is solidarity with neighboring countries, with countries in your region and so on. And I think China has demonstrated that when there is a need, they can demonstrate a certain level of solidarity with their neighbors. I think another takeaway is that when countries in your region are under threat or there's a security challenge, then China can step up and be a reliable partner, because you see, in international relations, one of the key lessons or the key factors of international relations is that nation states must be reliable and dependable. And that is what China has demonstrated in coming to the aid of the Koreans in that particular war.
Within a year, and ordinary members of Chinese Communist Party volunteered, sacrificed their lives in solidarity with Koreans. And for 3 years, I think we have learned that war strengthened the spirit, strengthened the nature and character of Chinese people, that they are there in supporting brothers and sisters in different situations in which hegemonic powers are asserting their will, and will remain grateful to the role played by the Chinese Communist Party in Korean War. And those are lessons that we have, that going forward, the world does not need unnecessary conflicts such as the Korean War. We have had other endless situations and endless conflicts in which China played a critical role. And there is no any other place in the world that is grateful in terms of assistance given by China than our own continent, the African continent, in which the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, contributed massively in the liberation struggles across the African continent.
The Chinese embassy in Mali has celebrated the 60th anniversary since the establishment of diplomatic relations between the two countries. The Chinese ambassador to Mali, Xu Liying, praised the close ties between the two nations. He also called for strengthening of cooperation, especially in the China-Africa Cooperation Forum and the Belt and Road Initiative. He also pledged China's support to Mali in battling the coronavirus pandemic. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Somalia seeks to hold elections in time after Parliament approves Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Robles' new cabinet. Plus, find out why a South African zoo is releasing endangered frogs into their natural habitat.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo,
Syria,
Juba,
Johannesburg,
Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Somalia now has a new cabinet ahead of its planned national elections. Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble now faces the major task of convincing political stakeholders that the elections will take place as planned, despite the limited time available. CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has more details from Mogadishu.
Lawmakers in Somalia have endorsed the country's new cabinet in a unanimous vote. On Saturday, members of parliament meeting in Mogadishu allowed Prime Minister Mohamed Hussein Roble's 70-member cabinet to begin the crucial task of state building.
188 lawmakers have voted in favor of the new cabinet and its agenda. No MP has abstained or rejected it. I hereby declare the new administration approved.
The cabinet comprises of 26 ministries and a deputy prime minister. Roble has made changes to his new team, with new faces heading the security and interior ministries. The main task for the new administration will be to ensure the upcoming elections are conducted safely and on time. The elections of new members of parliament is set to start next month, followed by that of senators. The much anticipated presidential vote will take place in February.
To achieve timely and credible elections, my administration will strengthen security across the country. To achieve this, we will increase security at all polling venues and centers. It is important for the federal government, regional administration and the Somali public to work together to achieve security during this transition period.
A lot of work lies ahead at very limited time. Starting today, we have a very strict timetable on what must be achieved going forward. Priority will be given to the most important issues.
Other key priorities of the new government include the fight against corruption, strengthening economic reforms, finalizing the draft constitution, and tackling the COVID-19 pandemic. Members of opposition parties have also been named ministers in the new cabinet, a move experts say is aimed at creating national unity ahead of crucial elections in the coming months. Meanwhile, political parties and presidential hopefuls are meeting at home and abroad in efforts to come up with their candidates who will compete against President Mohamed Abdullahi Farmajo for the country's top job. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
Egypt's ministers of tourism and information have finalized a new marketing campaign that has been co-produced by both ministries and an international marketing firm. The campaign is aimed at reviving the country's tourism industry, which has been hard hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. CGTN's Yasser Hakim has more details.
Tourism is one of the major sources of hard currency for Egypt, raking in some $13 billion in 2019. However, 2020 has seen the sector suffer a major setback due to the coronavirus pandemic. The IMF predicts a drop of more than 75% in tourist arrivals and revenue by the end of the year. The huge negative impact that the pandemic has had on the industry has prompted officials to map out a new marketing and advertisement campaign.
Normally, the word campaign, most of the people think it is about the advertising itself. In our point of view, it is something very holistic. We start by spreading these content, which is basically messages, whether through social media or above the line, below the line, printed material, etc. We bear in mind the aspects between the differences between countries, even our different target group when it comes to gender or age or kind of interests in the rich product mix that we have in Egypt.
Besides spreading information about Egypt, the campaign mentions refurbishment of the Pyramids Giza Plateau to make the visit to the oldest wonder of the world a more enjoyable experience. The opening of the Grand Egyptian Museum next year, said to be the largest in the world, is part of the campaign as well.
It's a step which we've already been so late in it, because you can't keep talking to yourself. I mean, inside Egypt, we have to go international, more global, because you need to address the people. They need to know what's happening in Egypt, what's going on, the new, as you see, the new steps the government government is taking for tourism. I think it's going to have a different impact because you're going to have more like global idea of how to market Egypt.
The campaign will focus on Egypt being safe health-wise, as pandemic numbers have remained at a low average of 100 cases a day in the main cities and nearly 0 cases in the tourist resort towns.
The main thing here, the main message we need to drive to our customers and Egypt lovers all over the world is to tell them about our measures that we have taken in all touristic places, whether airliners, airports, hotels, antiquity places.
It's a medium-term plan that includes aggressive advertisement abroad and on foreign media outlets to keep Egypt in the minds of many international travelers.
The aim is that once the pandemic is over and the restrictions are lifted, travelers would then choose Egypt as their first tourism destination. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
The Johannesburg Zoo is preparing for Africa's largest release of the endangered Pickergill reed frogs into their natural habitat. The frogs play an important role in the ecosystem by helping maintain the food chain balance. The zoo's been running a groundbreaking project to conserve the species. CGTN's Julie Shire was at the project and filed the following story.
The endangered Pickergill reed frog is endemic to South Africa's KwaZulu-Natal region. It's not bigger than a coin, but its importance to the environment is huge.
They feed on malaria-carrying mosquitoes, which therefore means they can reduce the number of mosquitoes that can infect people. Secondly, frogs are indicator species. So if they exist in an area, you are certain that the environment is clean. Can you imagine they disappear in KwaZulu-Natal? And there is nothing that controls mosquitoes in that particular region where they exist. It is definitely going to be catastrophic to the people that live around that area.
Threats from invader fungi species, global warming and habitat loss means these frogs are disappearing fast. The Johannesburg Zoo and Inzimvelo KZN Wildlife have undertaken a groundbreaking project to save the Pickergill from the brink of extinction.
We are now breeding them in a captive environment under suitable and specialized designed environment and conditions to ensure that we can take them back. To date, we have really released 372 specimens, and we are also doing post-release monitoring that we found that they're actually adapting, they're doing fantastic.
Animal specialists here are now preparing the next army of 400 frogs in a specialized lab at the zoo. The amphibians will soon be moved to the KwaZulu-Natal wetlands.
It's very difficult to take care of these frogs. It's hours and hours of monitoring and record keeping and evaluation taking place. We need to mimic the environment in here as closely as possible to the environment in the natural habitat in KwaZulu-Natal. We're looking at temperatures, humidity, environment, social structure, and we have to keep a very close eye on that.
It's the biggest release of the species in Africa and has to be timed perfectly.
You can't release them before it starts raining, because it had to rain, it must be wet in that area. There must be food for them, because if there's no rain, there won't be food for them.
The landmark breeding project sets a precedent for similar projects around the world. Without the Pickergill reed frogs, the South African environmental ecosystem faces a significant risk. Julie Shire, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Meanwhile, animal bioacoustics is a field of research that may be growing rapidly internationally, but in Africa it is a field of study that's still lagging behind. That's largely due to lack of funding. However, experts in that field are trying to address that problem. CGTN's Travers Andrews tells us more.
Animal bioacoustics is the combined study of biology and acoustics. It's a field of research that is increasingly appealing to a number of academics and scientists. Studies into the bioacoustics of marine species have been telling and revealed the impact of industrialization, including the effects of noise pollution on important marine species.
And the amount of noise in the marine environment has increased, particularly over the last 50 years or so, with increased shipping and also seismic exploration. And we know that marine mammals in particular are very sensitive to noise. Animals like marine mammals, so whales, dolphins, seals, but also other animals in the marine environment, say fishes and things like that, can be a reduction, say, in their communication range, so they can not communicate as far to each other. But it goes beyond that. So it can cause stress to those animals.
Bioacoustics researchers also focus on terrestrial species, such as elephants, rhinos, and hippos, where vocalization play a key role in communication and breeding. But the African bioacoustics community is broad and diverse, with experts presenting research on studies such as marine bird hearing in the air and water, as well as the acoustic occurrence and behavior of marine mammals. Africa has a wide range of behaviorally interesting and vocal species in unique environments. Academics and researchers are also pursuing new bioacoustics discoveries.
In terms of what we're really trying to do, we know that within the African continent, there's, amazing biodiversity. There's a lot of industrialization, and there's really a lot of opportunity to conduct this kind of research. And what we're trying to do is create a network of people who are interested in this field of study or taking this field of study, and basically joining people together and providing training opportunities and networking opportunities and just sharing our knowledge.
The African Bioacoustics community also aims to share that knowledge by hosting a virtual conference soon that will provide an even greater platform for the sharing of that knowledge and research, as well as present the latest studies and findings on topics such as marine bioacoustics. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
Let's now take a look at your business news. Here's what's ahead. Ugandan economists are asking the government to compel commercial banks to lower lending rates to single digits.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Over the last 14 hours of rain.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Ugandan economists want the government to compel commercial banks to bring down their lending rates to single digits. The call comes after the Monetary Policy Committee of the Bank of Uganda resolved to maintain the key lending rate at 7% for a second consecutive time. The central bank says it's aimed at supporting economic recovery in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. CGTN's Michael Baleke has that report.
The Bank of Uganda says its monetary policy stance, the easing of the country's lockdown, the stability of the exchange rate, as well as a pickup in both foreign and domestic demand are helping the country's economy to bounce back. But economists say the central bank is not doing enough because the effects of reduced interest rates are not being felt by Ugandans.
We look forward, even in the near future, in the near term, but also over the medium term, to a lending rate by commercial banks to single digit. If that doesn't happen, you still won't get, the economy will still not get that dividend that we would wish to see.
The central bank says the outlook still remains uncertain, largely attributed to the unpredictable course of the coronavirus. The bank projects Uganda's economy will contract between 0.2 and 0.5% this year, but return to growth in 2021. Right now, the government is facing calls to do more to help local businesses to recover from the pandemic.
There has to be a political pronouncement with action that those that are indebted to their landlords, the business entities across the country, need a grace period of not paying, particularly at that time when the economy was under lockdown.
At the beginning of the COVID-19 outbreak in March, Uganda imposed one of the toughest lockdowns in Africa to try to stem the spread of the virus. But the central bank cut its key lending rates to help prepare the economy
Sports activities and trainings will be suspended for 15 days with the possibility of extension of the ban. In addition, the general meetings of all sports federations will be deferred. Adnan Shawishi, CGTN,